Hello, everyone. My name is Clarence Haynes. I am an author and editor. I am specifically the co-writer for the Nubia duology, Nubia, the Awakening, and Nubia, the Reckoning, which I co-wrote with actor-producer Omar Epps. It's an Afrofuturist series that's set in the future in 2098 New York, in a city that's been radically altered by the climate crisis. And in this space, there are a group of refugees who are known as Nubians. They come from a mysterious island off the west coast of Africa, and the new generation of Nubians, begin to awaken to powers that they didn't know that they would have. That's in fact their birthright. And so we're dealing with we're using sci-fi fantasy, the sci-fi fantasy genre to deal with everything from climate change, as previously mentioned, to class divisions. The future New York has been radically divided by those who have wealth and those who do not. I see this as Omar Epps's love letter to the African diaspora, and he wanted to do something that would speak to young readers, but also have serious, heartfelt messages that, you know, are near and dear to his heart. And then as someone who's a lover of sci-fi fantasy, Afrofuturism, it was just such an honor to be able to work with him on the project once I was asked. Well, just in terms of the culture of the Nubians, there are things that would be considered, readers will note, there are things that will be considered traditionally African, in this case, West African. And it's very, you know, the whole history of where Nubia is located and what that real ancient nation was like is a whole other story. And we have a backstory around that, around how Nubians eventually migrated to the future New York. And also then keeping in mind, of course, urban Black culture. There's a lot of that will feel familiar. And just sort of exploring also in some ways this idea of how it works when you have immigration, when you have people coming over from elsewhere, and what traditions they hold on to and pass on to their children, and then what are some of the new traditions that their children create based on the circumstances in which they find themselves in. We try to do this in a really, really organic way. I've actually had the opportunity and honor to present the book to a few classrooms at this point, and spoken to some educators about it. And I think the biggest thing is it's very clearly relevant. You're dealing with, particularly for young people who are growing up in urban environments and where there are all sorts of challenges they're having to deal with, whether it is, and all sorts of choices they need to make. Like, who am I? Am I someone who's going to focus on my studies? In terms of aspects of street life, why is that appealing? Why would I gravitate towards this based on how I've grown up and what I've been taught? Are there entities who are invested in me making bad choices because it's beneficial to them to have people who they can exploit and do? So we go into all of that, and we've been told that it just a lot of young readers really take to sort of a direct exploration of those experiences, and then also all of the teenagers speak like teenagers. We didn't make them sound like how adults sometimes want to think teenagers talk. They talk, they talk like how teenagers talk. And we've been, even a particular young reader once asked, how did Omar and I get it so right considering our age, which was hilarious. Again, based on just some of the feedback we've received, and then just my own take on the book, I would say that there are specific, almost like modules that can be created around specific themes using the book. So for instance, if you're someone who doesn't necessarily want to go into characterization or exploring who the main figures in the book are, you can certainly use the book to explore issues around climate change, how that will affect urban environments. So for instance, we have a map at the beginning of each of the books that highlights what a future New York might look like. Even though this is a sci-fi fantasy series, so there are fantastic elements. There are the map itself is actually there are elements that are quite realistic. So, for instance, this idea that New York will have seawalls incorporated into its structure. So the very first book begins with New York dealing with, once again, a deluge of heavy rain, with other real world things that can be explored, how class divisions affect societies, how they affect economies. Also, what are some of the predictions around how tech will be incorporated into our lives? There are futurists, there are researchers and who believe that we will eventually have, there'll be people who choose to have tech embedded in their bodies. And that's actually an element of the series as well. So I would say there are all sorts of elements that educators can use to say, okay, we've read this sort of adventurous, fantastic book. Now, what are some of the real world items that we can pull out? And for people who are English teachers and such who want to explore things like characterization and themes and all that wonderful jazz, that's there as well.